The Lamborghini's engine roared to life in the VIP parking lot of the stadium, its midnight black paint gleaming under the California sun like liquid obsidian. Troy Bennett stood beside his new toy, 22 years old with a $7 million contract burning a hole in his pocket and enough gold chains around his neck to anchor a yacht. His phone was propped up on the hood, live stream running, 300,000 followers watching him celebrate like he'd already won the Super Bowl. He hadn't played a single down yet. The rookie running back flexed for the camera, his designer sunglasses reflecting the stadium where he'd soon make his debut, where the crowd would chant his name, where his jersey would fly off the shelves. This was his moment, his time, his kingdom. Nobody could touch him now. He was untouchable, invincible, immortal in the way only a 22-year-old millionaire could believe himself to be. The world was his and he wanted everyone to know it. Then a shadow fell across his perfect afternoon. A man shuffled into frame, homeless by every visible measure, wearing clothes that had forgotten what clean meant weeks ago, maybe months. His beard was unkempt, streaked with gray, his skin weathered by too many nights under overpasses and in shelters that turned people away when the beds filled up. In his hands, he clutched a deflated football, the leather cracked and faded, the laces barely holding together. He moved slowly, not with the shuffle of someone looking for a handout, but with the careful deliberation of someone whose body had been through wars most people couldn't imagine. He stopped a few feet from the Lamborghini, and his eyes landed not on Troy but on the car itself. There was something in his expression, something that wasn't envy or desire but recognition, sadness. The kind of sadness that comes from seeing your own ghost. Troy noticed him immediately, and his face twisted into something between disgust and amusement. He turned the phone camera toward the homeless man, making sure his followers got a good look at what happens when you don't make it, when you're not special, when you're nothing. The rookie's voice dripped with mockery as he spoke, loud enough for the man to hear, loud enough for the internet to hear. "Get away from my car, man. What are you even doing here? This is VIP parking. You're gonna get your dirt all over my paint job." The homeless man's eyes lifted slowly from the Lamborghini to Troy's face. When he spoke, his voice was rough, damaged by years of shouting on fields and decades of living rough, but there was still strength in it, still something unbroken beneath the surface. "Be careful with speed, son. The impact hurts more when you're coming from the top." Troy laughed, a sharp bark of derision that echoed off the concrete walls of the parking structure. He zoomed the camera in on the man's face, making sure to capture every detail of his deterioration for his audience. "You hear this guy? What do you know about the top, old man? You're standing in a parking lot begging. I just signed a contract worth more than you'll see in 10 lifetimes. Maybe you should go find a job instead of bothering people who actually have talent." He reached out and swatted at the deflated football in the man's hands, knocking it to the ground where it rolled pathetically across the oil-stained concrete. The homeless man watched it roll but didn't move to pick it up immediately. He just stood there, absorbing the insult, the humiliation, the casual cruelty of youth that mistakes money for wisdom and fame for character. Troy was still laughing, still playing to his camera, still performing for an audience that ate up this kind of content, when a voice cut through the parking lot like a blade. "Troy Bennett." The rookie's head snapped around so fast his chains actually jangled. Coach Mike Simmons stood 30 feet away, walking toward them with the kind of purposeful stride that made grown men remember their failures. At 63 years old, Simmons was a legend in coaching circles, a man who'd built dynasties, who'd sent dozens of players to the Hall of Fame, whose word carried more weight than any contract. Troy's entire demeanor changed in an instant. The arrogant influencer vanished, replaced by an eager puppy desperate to impress. He killed the live stream with a swipe. Coach Simmons. "Hey, this guy was hanging around my car and I was just telling him this is VIP parking, making sure everything's secure." But Simmons wasn't looking at Troy. The coach's eyes were locked on the homeless man, and as he got closer, his pace slowed. His face went through a series of transformations, confusion giving way to recognition, recognition giving way to shock, shock giving way to something that looked dangerously close to tears. The legendary coach's voice cracked when he spoke. "KJ Kevin, is that really you?" The homeless man bent slowly, picked up his deflated football and straightened with visible effort. When he looked at Coach Simmons, a ghost of a smile touched his cracked lips. "Hello, Coach, it's been a long time." Troy's confusion was written all over his face. He looked between the two men, trying to understand why his coach, his hard-as-nails, never-shows-emotion coach, was staring at some random homeless guy like he'd seen a ghost. "Coach, you know this guy?" Simmons turned on Troy with an expression that made the rookie take an involuntary step backward. "This guy, do you have any idea who you're talking to? Do you have any clue who this man is?" Troy shook his head, suddenly feeling like he'd stepped into something he didn't understand, like the ground beneath his expensive sneakers had turned to quicksand. Coach Simmons reached out and gently took the deflated football from Kevin's hands, holding it like it was made of spun glass and memories. "This man, Troy, is Kevin Johnson. Before you were even born, Kevin ran a 4.3 40-yard dash. He was the second overall pick in the draft, the second overall pick. He played for the Cleveland Browns, tore up defenses for the Philadelphia Eagles. He filled stadiums, people wore his jersey. Kids had his poster on their walls. He was everything you think you're going to be. Troy felt the blood drain from his face. Kevin Johnson. The name hit him like a freight train. He knew that name. Everyone who'd ever studied the game knew that name. Highlight reels from the late 90s and early 2000s, impossible cuts, speed that made defensive backs look like they were running in quicksand, touchdown celebrations that became iconic. Kevin Johnson had been a god once, and Troy had watched his old games on YouTube, had studied his footwork, had tried to emulate his signature moves. The Kevin Johnson from Cleveland, from Philly, but how did he end up? Troy's voice trailed off, the question too horrible to finish. Kevin looked at the rookie with eyes that had seen everything, lost everything, and somehow kept going anyway. I had the same car you do, son, maybe even nicer. I had the chains, the houses, the endorsements. I had a shoe deal. I thought it would last forever. Everyone does. Coach Simmons' voice was heavy with sorrow and barely controlled anger. Kevin had more talent in his pinky finger than you've got in your whole body, Troy, and you just treated him like garbage, like he was nothing. The parking lot fell silent except for the distant roar of traffic and the hum of the stadium's ventilation system. Troy wanted to disappear, wanted the concrete to open up and swallow him whole. His mind was racing, trying to reconcile the legend he'd idolized with the broken man standing in front of him. What happened? The question came out as barely a whisper. Kevin's laugh was bitter, the sound of someone who'd asked himself that same question 10,000 times. What always happens? Injuries first. Tore my ACL in year 4, came back too fast, tore it again. Teams don't want damaged goods, doesn't matter how fast you used to be. Then the money problems started. Bad investments, worse friends, people who saw me as a bank account instead of a person. Divorce took half of what was left. Depression took the rest. When you're playing, you're surrounded by people. The moment you're not useful anymore, you're alone. And when you're alone with nothing but time and pain, you make bad decisions. Started drinking to numb it, then drinking wasn't enough. Coach Simmons' hand was on Kevin's shoulder now, and the old coach's eyes were definitely wet. The game ends for everyone, Troy. Every single person who plays will hang up their cleats eventually. The question isn't whether the game will end. The question is who you are when it does. Troy felt sick. He thought about his live stream, about his 300,000 followers who just watched him mock a legend, who'd just seen him reveal himself as exactly the kind of person his own mother had warned him not to become. He thought about the comments that were probably flooding in right now, about how this would follow him, about how he just created a viral moment for all the wrong reasons. I didn't know. The words sounded pathetic even to his own ears. Kevin nodded slowly. Most people don't. That's the thing about falling, son. It happens so gradually and then all at once. One day you're on top of the world and the next day you're invisible. People walk past you on the street and they don't see a person, they see a problem they don't want to deal with. You become scenery, background noise, something to step over on your way to somewhere important. Before this moment, before you knew who I was just trash to you, something to mock for your followers. Coach Simmons' voice cut in hard and unforgiving. Fame is rented, Troy. The rent comes due every single day. One day the crowd stop chanting your name. One day your jersey goes on clearance. One day you're yesterday's news and there's some other 22-year-old hotshot taking your parking spot. And when all that's gone, when the lights go out and the stadium empties, all you have left is who you are as a human being. And based on what I just saw, you've got a lot of work to do. Troy wanted to defend himself, wanted to explain that he hadn't meant it, that he was just playing to the camera, that it was all just content, just entertainment. But the words died in his throat because he knew they were lies. He had meant it, every word. He'd looked at Kevin and seen someone beneath him, someone who deserved mockery, someone whose suffering was entertaining. He'd seen an opportunity for engagement and he'd taken it without a second thought. The rookie's voice was small when he finally spoke. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, I shouldn't have, Kevin raised a hand, stopping him. Words are easy, son. I've heard a lot of apologies over the years. From agents who stole from me, from friends who vanished when the money dried up, from family members who only called when they needed something. Apologies don't mean much unless they change something. The question is what you're going to do different now. Not just right now in this moment when you're embarrassed, but tomorrow, next week, next. When there's no coach watching, when there's no camera rolling, when it's just you and someone who can't do anything for you, that's when character counts. Coach Simmons looked at Kevin with an expression of infinite sadness. Come on, KJ, let's get you inside. Get you a hot meal, a shower, some clean clothes. We can figure out what comes next, but first let's take care of right now. Kevin nodded, grateful, but before he turned to follow the coach, he looked at Troy one more time. The rookie and the legend locked eyes, and in that moment, Troy saw his own future staring back at him. Not the glory years, but what came after, the uncertainty, the fragility, the realization that everything he thought was permanent was actually borrowed time. Take care of your mind, son, not just your body. The game will end for you too, and when it does, you need to know who you are underneath the uniform. You need to have built something real, relationships that matter, a sense of self that isn't tied to how fast you can run or how many touchdowns you can score. Because I promise you the fall from the top is a long way down, and there's nobody waiting to catch you unless you've given them a reason to care about you as a person, not as a player. Coach Simmons and Kevin walked toward the stadium entrance, the legendary coach's arm around the fallen star's shoulders, two men who understood that the game was just a game, that real life was what happened in moments like these, in parking lots and quiet conversations and the decision to see someone's humanity even when the world had decided they were disposable. Troy stood alone next to his Lamborghini, and for the first time since signing his contract, the car looked empty, meaningless. Just metal and leather and an engine that would be outdated in 5 years. He pulled out his phone and looked at the paused live stream, his finger hovering over the delete button. 300,000 followers waiting to see what happened next. He could spin this, probably. Make himself the hero somehow. Talk about how he didn't know how he was going to help, how this was a teaching moment. The algorithm would eat it up, but something stopped him. Maybe it was the look in Kevin's eyes. Maybe it was the disappointment in Coach Simmons' voice. Maybe it was the first real moment of clarity Troy had experienced since the moment he'd been drafted, the first time he'd seen past his own reflection and recognized that other people were real, that their pain was real, that his actions had consequences beyond engagement metrics and follower counts. He deleted the live stream, all of it, gone. Then he opened his banking app and stared at the number there, the absurd amount of money that had appeared overnight, that he'd done nothing to earn except be born with fast-twitch muscle fibers and decent hand-eye coordination. He thought about Kevin, about how he'd had this same amount once, maybe more, and how it had all evaporated like morning dew. Money didn't make you safe. It didn't make you good. It just made you comfortable. And comfort could be the most dangerous thing of all because it let you forget that you were human, that you were vulnerable, that you were one injury or one bad decision or one stroke of bad luck away from losing everything. Troy walked into the stadium not to find Coach Simmons or Kevin, but to find the team's community relations office. If he was going to be a millionaire, if he was going to have this platform, if he was going to be someone that kids looked up to, then he needed to figure out how to use it for something other than showing off. The woman at the desk looked up when he entered, surprised to see one of the new rookies in this part of the building. "Can I help you? I want to know about your programs for homeless veterans and former players. What we do to help people who have fallen through the cracks. And I want to know how I can get involved. Not just write a check, but actually be involved." The woman's surprise deepened, but she pulled out some folders and started talking. Troy listened, really listened, maybe for the first time in months. Outside in the parking lot, the Lamborghini sat alone, its engine cooling, its paint job perfect and unmarked. Inside the stadium, Coach Simmons sat with Kevin in the players' dining hall, watching as the fallen star ate his first real meal in weeks. The coach made phone calls, pulled strings, called in favors. By the end of the day, Kevin would have a hotel room for a month, paid for by a fund the team maintained for exactly this purpose. He'd have appointments with counselors who specialized in helping former athletes transition to life after the game. He'd have a chance, maybe not to reclaim what he'd lost, but to build something new from the ruins. It wasn't a happy ending because the real world doesn't work that way. Kevin's struggles weren't over. The demons that had brought him this low wouldn't vanish because of one meal and one hotel room. The road back from rock bottom was long and filled with setbacks and relapses and moments of despair. But it was a start, and sometimes a start is all anyone can hope for. Troy spent the rest of the afternoon learning about the dozens of former players who'd ended up homeless, who'd burned through their fortunes, who'd been chewed up by the machine and spit out with nothing but chronic pain and traumatic brain injuries and the ghost of who they used to be. The numbers were staggering, the stories heartbreaking. These were men who'd been heroes, who'd inspired millions, who'd sacrificed their bodies for entertainment, and the world had forgotten them the moment they stopped being useful. That night, Troy lay in his penthouse apartment, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Kevin's deflated football and the sadness in his eyes when he'd looked at the Lamborghini. The rookie thought about his own career, which hadn't even started yet, about the statistical likelihood that he'd be out of the league in 3 to 5 years, about the certainty that one day his speed would fade and his knees would give out and some other hotshot would take his spot. What would be left when that happened? Who would he be when he wasn't Troy Bennett, the football player? The question terrified him because he didn't have an answer. He'd spent his entire life being an athlete, building his identity around being faster and stronger and better than everyone else. Without that, he was just a kid from Oakland with a high school education and no real skills beyond running fast and holding onto a ball. He picked up his phone and opened Instagram, looking at his follower count, 302,000 now. He'd gained 2,000 followers from the deleted livestream, probably from people who'd heard about it through screenshots and gossip. The algorithm had noticed the spike in engagement and was pushing his other content harder. He was trending in sports media. People were talking about him. He could post something right now, capitalize on the moment, ride the wave to even more fame. Instead, he turned off his phone and sat in the darkness of his expensive apartment and thought about what kind of person he wanted to be when the lights finally went out. The next morning, Troy showed up to practice early and found Coach Simmons in his office. The coach looked up unsurprised and gestured to a chair. Kevin's in a hotel downtown. He's got appointments set up, support systems in place. It's going to be a long road, but he's got a chance. That's more than he had yesterday. Troy nodded. I want to set up a fund for guys like Kevin, former players who need help. I want to put money into it every year I play, and I want to help run it when I'm done playing. I want to make sure what happened to him doesn't happen to other people if I can help it. Coach Simmons studied the young man in front of him, looking for signs of performance, of ego, of someone trying to buy back a good reputation. But what he saw was genuine fear, the healthy kind that comes from staring into the abyss and realizing you're not special, that you're just as human and fallible as everyone else. That's good, Troy, that's a start. But here's what I need you to understand. This can't just be a publicity thing. This can't be something you do when cameras are around and forget about when they're not. These are real people with real problems, and they deserve better than to be someone's charity project. If you're going to do this, you do it all the way or you don't do it at all. I understand, do you? Because I've seen a lot of young players come through here thinking they're going to change the world, and then the world changes them instead. The money, the fame, the pressure, it turns people into versions of themselves they don't recognize. You mocked a homeless man yesterday for internet points. That's who you were. The question is whether that's who you want to stay. Troy met the coach's eyes. No, sir, it's not. Then prove it. Not to me, not to the media, not to your followers. Prove it to yourself. Prove it every single day. And remember this feeling, this shame and fear and determination, because on the days when you're tired and it's easier to just write a check than actually show up, you're going to need to remember why you started. The season began and Troy played well enough to justify his contract. He wasn't a superstar, not yet, but he showed flashes of brilliance that made the highlight reels and kept the coaches optimistic. More importantly, he showed up every Tuesday afternoon at a shelter downtown, not with cameras or press releases, but with food and time and a willingness to listen to stories from men who'd once been where he was now. Kevin came to one of those sessions 3 months later looking better, cleaner, more stable. The two men talked for hours about football and life and the strange journey that had brought them both to this moment. Kevin became a mentor of sorts, a living reminder that success was temporary but character was forever. Not everyone who watched that deleted livestream forgot about it. Troy's moment of cruelty lived on in screenshots and reposted clips, a digital scar that would follow him for the rest of his career. But slowly, through consistent action and genuine change, he built a different narrative. The fund he created helped 17 former players in its first year. His teammates started contributing. Other rookies around the league followed his example. It wasn't redemption exactly, because redemption isn't real. It's just a story people tell themselves. It was just a young man trying to be better than he was, one day at a time, one choice at a time. Years later, when Troy's own career ended after a respectable 7 years in the league, he didn't fall into the same trap that had claimed Kevin. He had relationships, purpose, a sense of identity beyond the uniform. He transitioned into coaching, working with at-risk youth, teaching them that talent was a gift but character was a choice. And sometimes, on quiet evenings, he'd think about that day in the parking lot, about the Lamborghini that he'd sold years ago, about the deflated football and the broken man who'd taught him the most important lesson he'd ever learned. He'd think about how close he'd come to becoming the worst version of himself, how one moment of cruelty had been a fork in the road, and he'd chosen, just barely, to take the harder path. The world moved on because it always does. New rookies signed new contracts and bought new cars and made the same mistakes Troy had made. The cycle continued, unbroken and probably unbreakable, because every generation has to learn its own lessons through its own failures. But every once in a while, someone would watch an old video of Troy talking about mental health and athletes, or they'd read about the foundation that bore Kevin Johnson's name, or they'd hear a story about a former player getting help, and they'd make a different choice. That was all anyone could hope for, really. Not to save everyone, not to fix the system, just to be a little bit better today than yesterday, to see people as people instead of obstacles or opportunities, to remember that everyone you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. So if you're watching this video right now on Money Stories That Matter, take a second and subscribe to the channel, because these are the stories that need to be told. The ones about real people and real struggles and the thin line between success and disaster that we all walk every single day. Drop a comment below and tell us about a time when you judged someone too quickly, when you had to learn humility the hard way. Share your story, because that's how we learn, that's how we grow, that's how we become better than we were. The stadium lights still shine every Sunday and the crowds still cheer, and somewhere right now a 22-year-old kid is signing a contract and buying a car and thinking he's immortal. And somewhere else, a former hero is trying to find a warm place to sleep, hoping tomorrow brings something better than today brought, carrying the weight of glory days that feel like they happened to someone else. The distance between those two people is smaller than you think. Remember that. Remember Kevin Johnson. Remember that speed fades and fame is fleeting, and the only thing that lasts is how you treat people when nobody's keeping score.